Hey there, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us here this week. If we haven't met yet, my name's Josh. I'm one of the pastors here at Community of Grace Lutheran Church right here in Peoria, Arizona. And it's a great weekend for you to join us online. We're having a special kind of exclusive online message here for Palm Sunday as we get ready to conclude our exploration of John's Gospel. And how do you know it's Palm Sunday? Well, there's a couple great clues. One, down there at the bottom of the screen, it says Palm Sunday. Part two, well, I happen to be wearing a green shirt. And last but not least, here are some lovely palm frond props that you can know that, yes, it is, in fact, Palm Sunday that we are celebrating this week. Now, one of the things that I love about my role as a pastor and as a theologian and as a Bible educator is bringing new light and new information to you. Maybe to introduce a story or a section of the Bible that's not as popular, maybe not as well known, that maybe you've never heard about before. Sometimes it's to take a well-known but maybe misunderstood or mistaught section of the Bible and politely bring a more appropriate interpretation that better aligns with what we know and what we believe about God around here. It's also fun for me to bring new insight to a story that many of us are sure that we've heard it all about before. Maybe there's some new cultural tidbits or something that we've learned in archaeology or in history or discovered some new version of a text that we can get excited about and that you can learn about from me, even though you were so sure you knew everything that there was to know about that really well-known part of the Bible. And some people might think that this is, at Palm Sunday, a great opportunity to do that because on this week, those ideas are all kind of foremost on my mind. But I don't get to do actually any of that today, so kind of hold on to that thought. Today we encounter Jesus on his final journey into Jerusalem. He has been preaching, teaching, healing, performing signs and miracles. And for us here at Grace, we've been experiencing this for like the last 3 months. This is how we started the year. But for Jesus in John's Gospel, this has been going on for 3 years. Over and over again, he was showing them something different. He was showing that he, as the Messiah, was different than maybe they had been taught to expect, or maybe that they were even hoping for. He opened their eyes to a better understanding of what God had been up to in his people's history. He showed them better ways to understand the prophecies and predictions about their people's future and his role as the Savior, as the Messiah. He revealed new information to help them understand who he was, what his purpose and his mission was in this world, and how he was going to do things differently than even what maybe they had hoped for. It was going to be better, purer, holier, more peaceful and inclusive and welcoming. It was going to be actually what God had intended all along, and maybe they had just kind of lost sight of what they were truly made and called to be. And so Jesus rides towards and into Jerusalem, surrounded by his closest disciples and friends, and followed by those who had heard his messages and seen signs. A bunch of them had just come from seeing his raising from the dead of Lazarus, but also people who had just been following him around, many of them for a long time. And they had become critical in his mission of bringing peace and justice to the world. So let's bring in John's Gospel again here on Palm Sunday. The next day, the great crowd that had come to the festival heard that Jesus was coming to Jerusalem. So they took branches of palm trees and went out to meet him, shouting, "Hosanna, blessed is the one who comes in the name of the Lord, the King of Israel." Jesus found a young donkey and sat on it, as it is written, "Do not be afraid, daughter of Zion. Look, your king is coming, sitting on a donkey's colt." His disciples did not understand these things at first, but when Jesus was glorified, then they remembered that these things had been written of him and had been done to him. So the crowd that had been with him when he called Lazarus out of the tomb and raised him from the dead continued to testify. It was also because that they had heard they had performed this sign that the crowd went to meet him. The Pharisees then said to one another, "You see, you can do nothing. Look, the whole world has gone after him." Now, there's some stuff that we might miss in our modern world because this is not something we tend to do, especially in our Western society. But you may have heard this in sermons before, but The people who are crying out in the streets are treating Jesus like he's an arriving king, a conquering hero, a battle-tested and battle-ready general, the kind of Messiah they had been taught to expect, the one who would come in power and in might to liberate his kingdom from oppressors, from false religions, and drive out those who did not live their lives according to their own culture and the way that they had been taught was the only right way. This is the one who would take David's throne and crown and usher in a new earthly kingdom and raise armies to defeat the enemies of Israel and of Israel's God. Yes, all those oppressors that had come before, the Roman Empire that they were dealing with then, all of the heretical people that were around them. This is what they were expecting. And you know that's also almost exactly the opposite of what Jesus had been trying to teach them for 3 straight years. They just didn't get it. They had their beliefs. They had their preconceived notions. And even with their Messiah being alive and among them, turning water into wine, feeding 5,000 people without breaking a sweat and still having leftovers, and raising a man from the dead to show them that he was the real deal, that they should be paying attention to him, that this was happening and they should be listening. When he had done everything to prove himself and his authority and told them, hey, you guys have been misunderstanding this whole time, be paying attention because this is what it's actually going to look like. In the midst of all that, they still got it wrong. I'm so glad that we as Christians have learned that lesson over the years. Oh, wait. Have we? The truth of the matter is that for the last at least 1,700 years or so, since Christianity became not only legal in the Roman Empire, but the only religion of one of the most dominant empires on earth, Christians have still, for millennia, been looking for the Jesus of might and conquest to be on their side, and have tried to present him as this earthly figure who will take on nations and who will transform things in power and might and throw out the bad guys and defeat all of our enemies. And we look for Jesus, when we think that way, to be on our side. Christians have heard Jesus' proclamations in the Gospels, the idea that his kingdom is not like the ones of this world, that it's going to be different, and yet have tried to use Jesus and his imagery and his words and his life and his very being to try to commit violence and atrocities in this world, just like the other kingdoms of this world, for the sake of power and wealth and dominance. And Christians have heard, we have all heard in places like these ones and in our scriptures, that Jesus told his disciples that we will be known to follow him by the way that we show love to one another and towards our neighbors. But instead, we've tried to spread this faith of love that we have at the point of the sword, or at the end of a barrel of a gun, or at the dropping of a bomb, or even with the threat of an eternal damnation that is more in line and better informed by Renaissance literature and paintings than actually anything that we find in the New Testament. We've heard Jesus' cries to feed the hungry and learned of his miracles where he did so without charging a penny. And yet we've repeatedly denied food to the vulnerable for the sake of our bottom line and for our own comfort. We Christians have heard that Jesus spent time with those considered sinners, how he celebrated them in their being and celebrated with them, and how he rejected places of power with more pious people to spend more time with the troublemakers. And instead of following that lead, we adopt a holier-than-thou approach, and we only hope to spend time with the people that we consider to be acceptable. Christians have heard Jesus' instructions to care for the least of these, that whatever we do to them is what we do to him. We've heard his instructions to lift up those rejected by society, and we have watched Jesus lift up the incredible roles of women in his life. And yet, we Christians today still tell the least of these to lift them up by their own bootstraps. We have told the people that have been rejected by society for whatever reason that it's probably their own fault that they're there in the first place. And Christians have repeatedly told women to stay quiet, to know their place, to do awful things like get back to the kitchen, or even worse. The followers of Jesus had 3 years of his teachings and his presence with him right in front of them, and they still managed to get things wrong at this pivotal moment when he rides in on this donkey. And it's easy for us to sit in judgment of those crowds that day. Why didn't they understand? Jesus was right there. He told them it was going to be different. He told them who he was. Why did they hold on to what their understanding of what a Messiah was instead of just listening to what he actually said? If you think that's bad, we've had 2,000 years with the teachings and presence of Jesus, and we don't always do much better. So rather than trying to say something innovative or new or creative to try and get a point across in a different way on Palm Sunday to feed you with some new bit of information on that same basic story that we hear just about every year in the spring right before Easter, it's a week from now, what if instead we just took a lesson from the crowd? What if instead of leaning on what we've been told to believe, what if instead of leaning on our own preferences, on our own understanding, what if instead of letting the world tell us what we're supposed to do or to follow the instructions of those who are claiming to speak for God, but they're actually spouting the words of the enemy of God? What if we actually listened to and followed what Jesus teaches us? And not be so dang shocked when it doesn't align with our own expectations. Friends, our King has arrived, but not to conquer, but to truly save us. Jesus knew the crowd was going to do this. He knew they would celebrate him. Even in their mistakes and in their ignorance, even though they were going to get it wrong, he knew that this was going to happen. And I don't want to spoil things coming up for Good Friday and then again on Easter, but he knew that a good portion of this same crowd that is shouting, "Save us, God, you're here, our King is here," would be the same ones to shout just a few days from then to crucify him. Jesus knew that the powers that be would have him tortured and executed for daring to threaten their own power and authority to determine what God really wants them to do. But he still rode in on that donkey, ready to save them. Not just from the empire, not just from the religious and political elites of his day, not just from their own ambitions and desires, but to save them from their sin and to save them from the power of death itself. Jesus knew the crowds would turn on him. And he also knew that we have and will often continue to distort his love for us to satisfy our own sinfulness. And just as Jesus rode into Jerusalem in spite of the knowledge that they had missed the point and would turn on him, he continues journeying towards you in faithfulness and in love, in compassion, and in the knowledge that we will rarely get it right, knowing full well that we don't deserve it. He approaches you because it's what you need. And it's what I need. It's what all people need. And he doesn't just ride in politely. He charges towards you, not to coerce you, not to force you, not to scare you, but to show you love. And he calls on us and his followers to do the same. And so may you continue to have a blessed Palm Sunday and a blessed Holy Week as we approach the glorious resurrection that we find at Easter. Amen.